Hello, welcome everyone to this edition of the Jim Laird Show, brought to you by Body IOFM. Today I have my good friend Chris Freeman with me. Chris is a strength coach and a trainer, kettlebell instructor. He currently works out of Lexington Athletic Club, where I worked for a significant period of time. And the interesting thing about what I do, for especially being in Lexington since 2001, and being in a place like LAC, Lexington Athletic Club, for as long as I was there, I think from like 2001 to like 2009, you're dealing with like 4,000 or 5,000 people, 4,000 or 5,000 members. You're seeing thousands of different people a day, and you get to meet all sorts of interesting people. And I first met Chris probably when you were in middle school.
Yeah,
Yeah,
about 14.
Chris was this kind of skinny kid, great kid that was working out with one of the coaches there, and he'd come in there all the time. At the time, he was going to like a private Christian school, and he later went to public high school. But one day Chris kind of disappeared. I didn't see him for a while, and then he came back, and he had this skull and crossbones tattoo on his elbow, and I was like, dude, what's going on here? And it was kind of like, I was like kind of shocked, because I never would have thought in a million years. And he was like, well, I joined the Marine Corps. And I was like, wow, like, okay, that's kind of a little bit of a culture shock. And then I'll just kind of give you an overview of the history. Chris ended up having a very serious trauma. And saying that in this interview, the main reason I wanted to do this interview is that every person in life goes through struggles and goes through adversity, everybody to a different degree. Obviously, people, some people have, issues they think that are really big that obviously are not. But Chris has been through some pretty hellacious things. And in this interview, I'm going to ask him a lot of personal questions. So, Chris, and we're doing this in person actually, which very rarely happens. So, saying that as a disclaimer, I might ask some pretty uncomfortable questions, and I've told Chris before the interview that he's more than welcome to basically veto any of the questions that I ask that might be too personal, because we're dealing with combat and injuries and traumas and death and all that kind of stuff. So we could end up getting into some stuff that's a little too sensitive for Chris, and he has the veto power on that. But basically, I met Chris. He ended up going into the Marines, and then Chris ended up getting injured severely, and we'll talk about that. But then I actually got to work with Chris at a facility here in Lexington, and Chris and I have spent a lot of time together. So I've worked with Chris, I've been around Chris, and we still interact professionally and as friends. So I've known Chris for a very long time. So I think this interview is, and we're going to get into talking about what Chris is doing now to help others with, what he's been through. And that's really, really admirable. And I think that's something that people need to grasp, is that when you go through difficult situations, that's a way of, whatever you believe faith-wise, but that's a way that you're basically gaining experience so that you can help others. If you take your adversity in your life and you learn from that, whether it's sickness or illness or catastrophe, you're going to be able to help other people through those things through your experience. So you can always turn these things into a positive. So, Chris, why don't we just start with, when I met you in middle school? What did you play sports? Like what kind of stuff were you into at that time?
Sure. So thanks for having me, Jim.
Oh, you're welcome.
Good to be here. So I started off, I was pretty, I would consider myself pretty unathletic. To an extent, I would be what I would consider a motor moron. As far as my ability to learn, my body awareness just was awful. And I didn't grow till my sophomore year of high school, right? So I got into a little bit of football. In retrospect, I didn't even know that there was track and you can, throw things, or maybe wrestling. And but I like being part of a team. I like training with weights, and I quickly discovered in gym class actually how weak I was. And just from sitting on the couch for a few years playing video games, and I was real into guitar and music as a kid. So when I started using my body and trying to challenge myself, I realized how low my level of preparedness was, and it pissed me off. And it kind of got me going and got me in the gym, and that's when I started, running into you at LAC, and was training with another coach, Coach Brian there, and that kind of got me started.
Yeah, and I was a little different person back then than I am now, but
Sure.
in some ways.
And as far as my draw to the Marine Corps, people have asked me that, and I'm pretty sure it came from seeing a special on the Discovery Channel, Making Marines,
Right.
and I was shocked. It was like a 30 or 60-minute special about boot camp, and the change in these kids. I was like, I want this.
Okay.
Like, I need this.
So that's basically what inspired a motor moron who is basically physically not inept but challenged,
Right.
To join the Marine Corps, because he was like, oh wow, that's what I want. I want to have what they've got.
Right.
Okay. So how did you go to the recruiting office? You enlisted on your own?
Yeah. So when I got serious about it, I was like, well, I need to train. So I started doing a little bit of research online. I got some books about PT exercises, and I basically did the whole pull-ups, push-ups, sit-ups, 3-mile run type of deal, and I saw progress, and I was hooked.
Cool.
Did a lot of swimming, a lot of running, and from that point, once I was ready enough physically, I started talking to the recruiters. 2003, so that would have been my senior year of high school, and I actually enlisted. My parents had to co-sign because I wasn't 18 yet. So somehow in wartime, 2003, I convinced my parents to co-sign for me my enlistment papers, because at that time, guys were pushing so hard to go into infantry that it was backed up. I couldn't even go to boot camp till July,
Right.
which worked out for me because I wasn't graduating until June anyways.
Right.
So
So basically, you enlisted during a combat. We were in active combat in Iraq.
Yeah.
When you enlisted, and what was did your parents have a lot of hesitation?
Oh, sure. I mean, they were like, you're completely crazy. I've been the type of kid that I get into something and I'm kind of like all in.
Right.
But I've also had a lot of different interests, since I was growing up, and continued to do so. So I think at first they probably thought it was a phase, and they saw how hard I was working to make this goal happen.
Right.
And, I wasn't driven to go to college right out of high school. I knew that I didn't have that drive in me, and I wanted a different path, and I needed to prove myself, and I wanted that challenge.
Sure. We see on TV, and we see SEALs training and the Marine Corps, and obviously out of all branches other than like what they do in BUDS, the Marines are the toughest. Unless you're getting into like the Army Special Forces, like Rangers and Green Beret and things like that.
Right.
It's the toughest boot camp there is. And could you share a little bit about the experience of what it's like to go into that, and was it worse than what you expected, or because you were educated, it was you were like, oh, I know what I'm getting into? Was it worse than what you expected? Was it better than what you expected? What kind of experience did you have?
It was about what I expected. Physically, I didn't feel like it definitely wasn't the most challenging thing that I did while I was in the Marine Corps. That would be later at Amphibious Reconnaissance School in Virginia. Mentally, it was weird because you're basically your drill instructor's bitch for 13 weeks. And we call it, when you go into boot camp, you lose your brain. They take your brain from you when you're a Marine, and then hopefully at some point you'll get it back. But you learn to follow, orders, and execute, quickly with intensity, and it's just a big head game, the whole 13 weeks, and you learn a lot of stuff, but it's just really, an indoctrination. There's a lot of shouting, a lot of yelling. As far as there's no, physical abuse really to speak of, but you are making guys to go fight a war, so it's not, it's not super easy.
Right. It's not cupcakes and hand holding.
No. There was a few kids in my platoon I can remember. You're gonna graduate on the parade deck with me tomorrow? And you're a Marine, really? Because I would see how they would react to the training.
Right.
But not all Marines are combat Marines. So every Marine's a rifleman, but that's only true to an extent. But that's why I got drawn to Marine Recon later on. So.
Okay. Were you selected for that, or did you choose that on your own?
So at that point in time, they now have like a contract that you can sign. I wasn't promised anything. All what I was promised was I was going to pull a trigger. So I enlisted as a 0300 open, which is just any infantry MOS, and MOS is military occupational specialty. So whatever your job title is going to be. And I enlisted as a 0300. So when I was at School of Infantry training, this is after boot camp, you're given the opportunity to take the recon screening. If you have the ASVAB score, your GT score is good enough, meaning you're smart enough, you've got the proper rifle score, and your PFT is high enough. So at that point in time, I got the opportunity to take
your
that.
PT or your physical preparedness.
Yeah, right? Yeah, your physical fitness test. And so I passed the screening. You know, there was about 5 of us out of about 50 kids. They were trying to push, for more recon Marines at that point in time.
Well, obviously in combat, you need that recon is one of the most important jobs.
Yeah, I mean we're talking guerrilla warfare, small unit tactics. It's just necessary for modern warfare, right? So it was 5 out of 50 of us passed the screening, and then 5 of us went through what you call recon and doc platoon. So they call it RIP. And you're there for an undisclosed amount of time. Whenever you can get a school seat, provided your cadres or instructors want to send you to recon school. I was there about 3.5 months, and then I went to amphibious recon school, which they no longer have. It's all basic recon course on the West Coast now, so they've done away with ARS. But I graduated there in 2005. Was stationed at Camp Lejeune after that, and I was with the 2nd Recon Battalion.
How long were you between boot camp and your recon training? Did you actually go to combat?
It was.
You pretty much knew you were going to war when you enlisted.
Oh yeah, that's why I went.
Okay.
And as far as my buddies that I served with in recon, that was why we all joined. Okay. we were craving that. We all wanted to. So that was about 2 years of training.
Why do you think you craved that combat experience? Was it because of the 9/11 stuff, or was it something inside of you that you just wanted to prove that you could do it? Like, what makes somebody want to go to war? Because I think Hollywood has glamorized warfare. I've watched. I'm a huge history nerd, and I've always been interested in the military. And I watched like Saving Private Ryan. If you haven't watched that, that is probably the closest rendition you've seen that, haven't you? To real combat. And it's horrible. It's hell.
Yeah.
So what into your mind, like what makes a young man want to do something like that when it's not going to be fun? Like what is your mindset on something like that?
I would say at first it was probably like the former UC, like the kind of the glory, the idealistic part of war and what has to be done. Later on, it became the training,
right?
And they build that into your makeup now as your new identity is a Marine or a recon Marine. That's your new deal. And as you grow closer with your buddies on your workup, everything is geared towards that end goal of going down range and doing our job,
kicking ass.
And it's just like, I'll never be that cool again is the joke,
right?
But that's how it was, and it was it was gory, and there was a lot of bad shit that went down, but it was also all this training builds up, and you're doing your job, and nobody's fucking with you.
Mm-hmm.
The Marines, there's a lot of games, and there's a lot of bullshit, and there's a lot of red tape, bureaucracy, a lot of stupid stuff. Gear inspections twice in the rain. You got to dry all your gear out. That kind of stuff. And when you're deployed, you're doing your job, and you're with your team of 5 guys or your platoon.
Right.
You're punched out, and it feels great.
Yeah, that camaraderie. I've watched from a lot of the documentaries and stuff that I've watched about World War II and about Vietnam, and the reading that I've done. These guys talk about they haven't seen each other in 40 years. Some of these World War II veterans, and then they meet each other, and it's like they've never even left. Like the bond you get from going to combat with somebody is like nothing else you can experience. And
right.
So I can see the kind of the drive towards that. And you got married at that time too, didn't you?
We were actually still just dating.
Oh, okay.
We'd only been dating for a few months. When I deployed, we didn't get married till after my recovery from injuries and that kind of stuff.
Oh, okay. I didn't realize that. I didn't realize that. Well,
yeah,
kudos for her for sticking with you up through that.
Oh yeah, Jordan's a hell of a girl. So yeah, we've been dating. I think 6 months before I deployed.
Right.
And she was right there.
How hard was that, having a relationship while you're in basic and in training and all that kind of stuff? But I imagine it also provides you an outlet when you do get to talk and that sort of thing, and you develop obviously a connection that's beyond just the physical stuff.
Sure.
You develop that kind of emotional connection. What was that like for you, having that kind of serious relationship while, obviously I would imagine that kind of helped keep you grounded in a way.
So when I was going through like some of my toughest schools, we weren't dating yet. But once we started doing the workup, by that time we were together and, during deployment. So it definitely changes the way that you think about things, and who you're going to call first. She was number one, and then my parents. Sorry, Mom and Dad. But, it changes the way that you think about things. And I mean, I knew as soon as we punched out, and we touched down in Kuwait, we weren't even in Fallujah yet. I was like, this is the girl that I want to hold on to. I knew right then. So, things get serious pretty quick. So that's kind of how it happened for us.
So let's get into the crazy stuff. So you were deployed, and obviously you were doing, give us kind of an idea of the kind of stuff that you can talk about that you were doing once you got there, and what the status of events were when you got there.
Right. So we got into country. We did our left seat, right seat rides. Which is where you're transitioning with. We were transitioning at that time with First Recon, and it was pretty quiet when we got there. We got there around March 2006. And it was kind of eerie because we were able to walk around places that you're not supposed to be walking around. And there's a lot of new guys. It was about 50-50 guys that have deployed one or two times. My platoon sergeant at the time, this was his 6th deployment, so it was old hat for him. And but we were well trained, so we I think it was around April, and we started getting hit. A lot of IEDs at that point in time.
Booby traps for you that don't really know anything
roadside
about
bomb
combat.
is the real common.
Right.
I call it a misnomer because if it was on the side of the road, it's not going to inflict the damage as if it was directly underneath the vehicle.
Sure.
So they IED'd the shit out of us. Some small arms, not really a whole lot of mortar fire because they were so inaccurate.
Right.
Why risk it when they could just dig it in and make an IED? So we hit some really serious stuff in May of 2006. So what we were doing over there, we would do anything from direct action raids, knock and talks, where we're going around a village and we're just gathering intelligence. We're asking them what they need. Sometimes we make deliveries of food, supplies, toys for the kids around there. I mean, they didn't even have a soccer ball.
Hearts and minds, quote unquote.
Hearts and minds, exactly.
And then still, trying to get some trust so you can get bad guys and figure out who you need to take care of.
Right, and always be ready to kill. So there was I was primarily in the Zidon when we were in Fallujah, which is kind of a countryside area. So it was actually surprisingly green because they had a lot of irrigation systems. So that was kind of weird. There was a lot of livestock and a lot of greenery, but it was also, they never had a government, so it was completely uncontrolled. In other words, there was a lot of foreign fighters that were moving in and out of the area, a lot of insurgents, so it was just kind of a little bit wild, I guess.
Yeah. So let's get into how long were you over there and active before you had your incident?
So we got there in March, like early March, and I got hit June 6, 2006 was the time that I got blown up, which is, it's D-Day. 6606. It's complete irony about the number sequence.
Sure.
And anytime I see it, it does give me cold chills. So we've been there about 3 months.
Do you feel comfortable talking about what you went through on that day?
Yeah.
So give me a little bit of an idea of what was going down. I believe from the little I know about it, you were out in a Humvee.
Yeah.
Doing some,
We were winning hearts and minds, man. We were doing knock and talks. We punched out early that morning on a vehicle patrol. We only had 2 Humvees because we were only going about 1.5 miles from our firm base that we set up in a house. So we had 2 vehicles. We punched out. We did some foot patrols, walking around, handing out toys. And we were out there for a little too long, and I don't know if they had this IED, improvised explosive device, had been dug into a dirt road for a little while, and somehow we missed it on the way out there. The way it works is it's with a pressure plate IED, as you have a positive and negative charge. It could be a PVC pipe, 2 planks of wood, but their little cars could drive over the shit. You know,
Right.
our
There's
Humvees
not enough weight to-
not enough pressure, right?
Right.
So the thing about those is they're timed perfectly. So on our way back, it's probably around 5 or 6. That time we hit the IED and it blows a huge hole right through the center of our truck. This is all secondhand information because I don't remember any of it.
Yeah, which is probably a good thing.
Yeah. That's one of the silver linings of the whole traumatic brain injury deal is there's a lot of missing parts, a lot of blanks in my memory. So I can remember the last thing that I can remember before I got hit was we paused our vehicle before we hit this canal to just sweep it real quick, and I was like, yeah, let's get out of here. I had a real bad feeling.
You're good.
Okay.
I'm just telling you to get your hands down.
Oh, sure.
Yeah. Sorry.
So I had a really bad feeling. We got back in the vehicle, and that was the last thing that I remember before waking up. I assume I was in transport, probably from Germany to Bethesda Naval Hospital. I woke up in kind of like a tray situation, and I didn't have a whole lot of room over my head, and I remember kind of freaking out. And they, I guess they shot me up. It was something to put me back under, calm me down. And then I remember waking up in the ICU at Bethesda Naval Hospital a couple days later.
How many guys were you with?
So we had 5 guys in our vehicle too behind us, and we had myself, my team leader Mark Smykowski, and then my turret gunner Chris Brink, and our interpreter. So we had 4 in our vehicle.
And
my team leader was killed.
Okay. Was anyone else survive, or were you the only one?
Yeah, my turret gunner Chris Brink. Yeah.
Okay.
He's alive and kicking in Melbourne, Florida right now.
Okay.
So,
I imagine. Do you have any guilt over other people dying and you living?
It was. I wouldn't say that I'm over that, but that was probably the hardest thing for me to. That was the hardest thing for me to face. When once I was, out of the hospital and I was focused on my physical recovery, getting over that took a long time. And I may never be over it completely.
Yeah.
But there was a point when I just decided that I've got to live my life and I've got to honor these guys.
Right.
And everything, the way that I treat people when I'm checking out at the grocery store, the people that I work with every day while I'm coaching, that's my life's work right now. Is to honor their memory, because if it had been, the shoe had been on the other foot, I wouldn't want people sulking around and living a bitter existence, carrying around nothing but hate.
Right.
I'd want them to do something good with their life and pass that on. So that was the decision that I had to make, and that's what I've done.
Excellent. And you've done a wonderful job with that. And
Thanks, brother.
Let's talk about the extent of your injuries. What basically did what happened to you? So you had this bomb blow up underneath you.
Right. So the middle console of the vehicle, I got blown out the left hatch, and when they found me, my helmet was gone. It was blown about 25 yards away from me. I don't really know why, because I had it strapped on, but there was a lot of overpressure inside the vehicle when it's all closed up and contained.
Sure.
All our windows are sealed up. So the fact that I can still hear anything is pretty remarkable. I attribute that to the headset that I was wearing at the time. So I got hit and I broke my leg in 5 places. So my tibia, fibula, my femur was broken in 3 places, and I shattered my arm, and my elbow was crushed into pieces. So and the worst part was the traumatic brain injury. I had a mild traumatic brain injury. And even though it's mild, much worse than just a standard concussion. They call it an intracranial hemorrhage, which is just a brain tear or brain bleed. And at the time, they thought it was pretty bad. We kind of were dismissive of it. And my recovery from that initially was pretty quick. But then later on, I started to discover that I had some limitations and some issues that needed to be dealt with. And those took a lot longer to recover from than broken bones and pieces of shrapnel that got stuck in my leg. So
what was the physical recovery like from that? Do you have hardware or anything like that?
yeah. So they fixated my leg and my arm, and they actually repaired the bones. I never had a cast on my leg or my arm. So what they did was they fixated it with a metal rod down my shin bone, my tibia, and then screws at the bottom and the top, and then they fixed the femur fracture with a plate and about 10 pins or screws that run laterally on the head of the outside of my femur there. And then the same thing with the elbow. They fixed that with a plate around the olecranon process right there on the pointy prominence of the elbow, and then about 6 or 8 pins.
Okay. What was the mental aspect of that? You obviously spent a lot of time in bed and a lot of time in rehab. What was that experience like, and what kind of things did you have to go through mentally to get through that? Because obviously going from being this super fit Marine, very capable physically, to basically having that all taken away from you in an instant. What was that like for you?
Yeah, that was. I mean, that's exactly what it was. Is I was at I wouldn't say peak physical condition, because when you're deployed, you're just dealing with what you got. But I was in pretty damn good shape and very physically capable. And now all of a sudden I'm laying in bed broken, mentally as well as physically, and it just it's a real vulnerable feeling that I really didn't like. So the initial recovery, I was in a wheelchair for 3 months. Most of that I actually ended up hopping around my house on one leg because I couldn't use crutches because my right arm was broken. But when I started weight bearing, that's when the recovery started really picking up. But it was just it was a bear mentally just to be that handicapped, and I hated going out to restaurants. We had to find a wheelchair lift. It gave me an entirely different perspective on how people struggle that have to have accessible places all over town they go. I traveled back and forth to the Naval Hospital from home, in a wheelchair, and they dropped me a couple times, and it was crazy. I had to go up in the plane. I had to hop up the stairs on one leg because they didn't have a lift. Which I was okay with, but it was there's just a lot of things that you don't think about.
Right. We take for granted.
Right.
How did your parents handle this whole thing? Because obviously, like you said before, they had to co-sign for you. Did they feel partially responsible for this? Did they really struggle with the fact that they basically had to co-sign for you to go in? Is that something you even talked to them about, or
that's one thing I've never asked them. I'm sure maybe a small part of them would feel responsible, but they knew ultimately
that you would have done it
sooner or
anyways.
later I was going to go. It may have been a few months later, but just incredibly supportive, man, the whole time.
That's great.
I was able, when I was on convalescent leave for 5 or 6 months, I was able to stay at my mom's house here in Kentucky and do outpatient physical therapy through Cardinal Hill, which was a stand-up hospital, man. It was great to be able to go back and forth there. And, mom and dad are great, so I couldn't ask for better parents.
How did this affect your, obviously you're like a newlywed. How did this affect your marriage and your relationship with your wife?
It was brutal. And, Jay would tell you the same thing. It was really tough because we got married in 2008. So, and you can see pictures at our wedding. I was still really thin.
Yeah.
Because, I can remember on our honeymoon, my feet were in such pain. I couldn't even wear my sandals because they hurt the bottom of my feet so badly. So there was just, I was on antidepressants. I had really not even addressed a lot of the mental struggles. They wouldn't come till, a couple of years later.
Right.
A lot of it was just, I wasn't able to process what happened.
Right.
And I really wasn't able to come to terms with how bad my TBI was, with my memory.
TBI as in traumatic brain injury.
Yeah. So they're just finding out a lot more about how that affects your ability to communicate, not just your memory, vision, that kind of stuff, but your personality changes.
Right.
You'll hear about people getting in a car wreck and be like, they were just different after that.
My great grandfather or my grandfather on my mom's side went off the Alaska Highway
Wow.
and had a traumatic brain injury. Came back, didn't know who my mom was, anything, and he was a totally different person.
Yeah.
And it became very violent. And people don't realize that you lose the ability to control emotion. You become a different person, and then all of a sudden, this woman that you married, you're different than you were before, especially with the trauma that you go through. I mean, that kind of stuff changes you forever. Let's talk about how long did the actual recovery process take before you started? Like, what here you are, you're in this bed, you've got all these physical limitations. What did you do after that? Like, how long did it take you to figure out what you were going to do and what was next in your life? I'm sure part of you was just like, well, I'm just going to be a disabled veteran forever, or what was your thought process in that?
They start doing physical therapy before you can really even get out of bed. They'll have you do some things. So the first time that I remember, being able to do more than just the real low-level PT exercises, once I was able to transition from the bed to the chair, and I could do, I could take a shower. I only fell twice, so that was good. Was being able to swim.
Right.
Because I was supported and I was, fairly weightless in the water. And even though my broken limbs were uncasted, I could still swim and I could float. I could hold my breath. And, in recon, a lot of people don't realize how much we do in the water.
Right.
It's called amphibious reconnaissance for a reason. Drown proofing is, one of our expertise. I say I'm not a good swimmer. I'm good at not drowning.
Yes.
Just because all the pool work, the open water fins. So it was kind of a familiar, like, safe zone for me to get out in the sun, to be in the have that large body of water to support my weight, and also I think probably for the lymphatic system, that how many gallons of water would that be even in a small swimming pool, pushing inward on your body and your joints?
Yeah, and just moving.
Yeah, just moving. Right. So that
and moving in ways you probably couldn't on dry land,
right?
Because you had limitations and you were in pain.
Right.
So how many years did it take you to get from hospital bed to where you were actually able to just move around, quote unquote, in a normal fashion?
Right. And that's all. Most standard PT practices set you up so that you can walk, and you can feed yourself, and you can go to the bathroom. They're not looking for you to be athletic again like you were.
Right.
So it's exactly like you described it. That I would say. I was still doing physical therapy when I went back to Camp Lejeune in 2007, and it continued really until I left the Marine Corps in like the fall of 2007. So it was a good year and a half
of
physical therapy for me to get back on my feet, able to do some, I tried to do some walking, jogging, and ended up refracturing my leg because I was a little too aggressive with that.
Imagine that.
Yeah, funny, right? So... So good, yeah, about a year and a half.
What was that struggle like to have to start over again? You went back to, you had come from this kind of goofy kid that I first met who, obviously had some physical challenges. You called yourself a motor moron, to actually be regressed even, like regressed even more than you were. Like, you started off as this goofy kid.
Yeah.
And then you end up getting pulled back to square zero. Like, what kind of mental struggle was that for you?
It was tough. Just because you see what your body's been, and it's like banging your head against a wall when your desire is to be back to that level, and it's not happening.
Right.
I've always been a patient person, and overcoming those hurdles made me even more patient.
Yeah.
When I'm coaching people, you'll never see me lose my cool or roll my eyes. I don't have that in me anymore, because I understand what it takes to. You're going from literally crawling.
Right.
So it's
you are where you are. And
you are where you are. Exactly.
I think that's one of the biggest things that people don't understand, is that you got somebody who hasn't done much at all. Like, max effort for them might be the warm up. People don't, people go overtraining, and they get, but for somebody who's untrained, just about anything can basically put them in a state where they can't adapt to it. And so, that's one of the biggest mistakes I think in the fitness industry, and a reason why people they start, but then they don't continue, is because they end up getting thrown into something that's so far above their level that they get frustrated, and they stop, because they're like, oh my God, this is way too, instead of starting where they are and starting with some really simple things, they start off with way too much. A lot of it has to do with the internet, and everybody's seeing all this fancy bullshit online about this and that, and I want to do this and that. They're looking at all these elite people, and they don't realize they have to start, like, if you need to go from Lexington to Los Angeles, you've got to start in Lexington. You can't start in Kansas City.
Exactly.
So
and if I had to have that perspective, my recovery would have gone a lot smoother.
Sure, but you had to learn that.
Exactly.
Just like I had to almost bleed to death to learn how to actually take care of myself.
Right.
Certain people need to get hit in the head with a hammer in order to learn lessons, but at least you and I have both learned, and then we're able to help other people. So at what point, so you basically, it was 2008, you said?
Yeah.
You got yourself moving around. What was your next transition from there? From, obviously you were still in the Marine Corps, obviously.
Right.
Did you have an option to stay in the Marine Corps, or did you decided you wanted to exit? How did that work?
So at that point in time, my Jordan and I were engaged, and I was back at Lejeune, and my second recon, they were getting ready to punch out. They were on a workup, and I was having to sit on the sidelines and watch all my buddies with the new guys coming into the recon battalion doing this workup and training, and I was driving the Humvees, and I was doing paperwork in the office, and it drove me nuts. I was having to go to appointments, several times a week over on Main Side, and it sucked. And I got tired of it pretty quick, and I realized my body's not healing up. I'm not going to be able to redeploy, because initially that was one of the things that really pushed me to recover as fast as I did, was to redeploy. I had that burning desire and hate at that point in time.
Yeah.
So when I realized that, okay, I'm not going to be able to go down range with these guys, I don't want to stay here and do admin work. And they gave me the option. They're like, you can finish out your 4-year enlistment. But what I did is I went ahead and got the ball rolling. I want to medically separate, which was another 7-month hellacious process of paperwork and, proving how injured I was. I was like, seriously? So that's a whole other story right there.
That's the government
oh
for you.
Oh my gosh.
Did you have an exit strategy once you decided that you didn't want to be in there and be like a paper pusher? Did you have an exit strategy in your mind of what you wanted to do next, or you had no idea?
Honestly, I knew how much I had enjoyed the learning experience when I got to work with a couple of really good physical therapists. And I said, maybe I could go back to school and be a PT. Mm-hmm. But until then, maybe I could just train people, and I could be a personal trainer. So I got my certified fitness trainer certification through the ISSA, through correspondence while I was at Lejeune still. I would just go home in my room and I would study. And at that point in time, I was working a lot with kettlebells. Mm-hmm. And that's when I started to feel really good. My mistake was I thought kettlebells are a part of this thing called CrossFit.
Yes.
But it's got all this other stuff too.
Right.
And a lot of, my buddies were starting to get into it as well. And I said, well, I'll give this a try. So it was a toss-up between doing my CrossFit Level 1 and doing the RKC, which I'd wanted to do since high school.
Right.
And I shoulda, woulda, coulda. But I went the CrossFit route and had to learn some really hard lessons because I beat the shit out of myself training and got, as the term, orthorexia.
Yes.
Got weird. I call it my weird years, and thank God my wife didn't smother me with a pillow while I was sleeping, because, like anybody that gets into CrossFit and drinks the Kool-Aid hardcore, I was 100%. This is the way to train. Everybody else is wrong.
Right.
As many young people think that way.
When did you figure that out that wasn't working for you?
When I started getting more broken, mm-hmm. and these are injuries that happened completely non-related to my combat injuries. Shoulder stuff, and I was like, this is not working for me at all. I wanted to be strong, I wanted to be fit, but I didn't need to do 30 minutes of Metcon that wasn't my goal. I was 155 pounds.
Yeah.
And in 2009, we hosted a basic barbell certification with Mark Ripito at my gym here, CrossFit, or at the gym I was working at the time, CrossFit Lexington. And I heard Rip get up there, and I think he called me an insect, because I was so gangly and
praying mantis.
Yeah, and it was a joke, but I was like, I don't even look like I lift.
Yeah.
Do I even lift? Is the joke now? And it didn't look like I did, and I wasn't strong. So that kind of redirected my path. And then, that kind of coincided also with doing a little bit more, some of the corrective work to bring my body back into balance so that I could train,
right?
And get stronger, because it was a fucking train wreck, man. I mean, I wish I had a video of me trying to do a set of squats, linear progression, from 8 years ago, because it was a disaster.
I remember.
It was yeah, exactly. And you helped me a lot with my squat then. But yeah, it was gnarly. So that kind of redirected my thought process, and thankfully removed me from that spin cycle. I probably should have been seeing a therapist then instead of worried about a training program.
Yeah, it's a hard balance, especially for people like yourself, or even myself. The struggle I've had over the last few years of like, I want to be strong, but at what point does that actually take away from my quality of life?
Yes.
And I've seen you struggle with, lifting and then figuring out, and I think you've done a really good job of figuring out the right dose for you, and not worrying about what other people online are doing or what everybody else is doing or what works for everyone else. And, if your main goal is to be functional and to be above average, you really don't have to do that much. You just have to be really smart about it. Now, if you want to be elite, you want to set world records, you're going to have to make sacrifices, but that's like going in the Marines. Like that's a totally different avenue. But for 90% of people, they don't need anything spectacular, and they don't need to be doing 30, 40 minute metcons several times a week. It's just not necessary.
Yeah.
So talk a little bit about your transition as a coach and how you've evolved from working at a CrossFit and then going out on your own, and how your experience with your injuries and getting over what you've been through has affected your approach as a coach.
Okay. So I left the gym that I was working at about 3 years ago, and moved over to LAC and started running my own show, and it was awesome, because the one thing that I didn't realize about the coaching environment that I was in was how loud and overstimulating it was. And with my brain injury, the part of my head that was the most impacted, my parietal temporal lobe, the auditory processing section of my brain was impacted significantly. And that amount of overstimulation, energy drinks, driving myself hard all day, left me super duper just tired, put out, angry, cranky all the time, exhausted. And LAC, although they don't have the best music selection, everything's toned down. People are a little more chilled out. There's more space. There's even though people are doing some goofy stuff like they do in all gyms, there's some people over there that they look like they lift, and they take care of themselves. A lot of people warm up, and they do a good job with that. But it was just me and my clients, and I was like, this is a really nice, refreshing change to be able to just do my thing and train people how I want to train, which is build resiliency and strength. Yeah. But people move well, and then we get them strong, and that's pretty much all I do with people. Everybody does a strength program. It may look very different with a 70-year-old female client than it does with a young 20-year-old guy that comes to me, and maybe he wants to go to the Marines, or maybe he's training for lacrosse. But yeah, everybody builds resiliency, and everybody gets stronger. And I actually had a client, my live day, my 10-year live day was earlier this week, on Monday actually. And one of my clients saw a post that I'd made about a hat I was wearing that reminded me of my team leader, my good friend Mark Smykowski. And he said, when I saw that picture, he said, I was literally thinking about skipping the gym and not coming. I was going to bail on our session. And he said, I saw that, and he said, I hung my head, but then I also smiled, because people have a hard time making excuses around me. I hear a lot of trainers complain that people blame them for their lack of success, and I don't have that issue. I never have people that blame me because I'm always upfront about explaining to them, this is your training.
Right.
This is 100% on you. I'm there to guide you.
Right.
Through your training and your nutrition and lifestyle management. It's not my deal.
Yeah. Well,
So-
and people tell me that too. Well, you did such an amazing job with this person, or they're so, and I'm like, I didn't do it. I just guided them. They did the work. Like, and I'm very
Yeah.
upfront when people come into me too. I'm like, if you're not willing to change your diet, change your lifestyle, and at least make an effort at sleeping, then you don't even bother coming in here. Don't waste my time and don't waste yours, because unless that's all squared away, you're not going to get the results over the long term that you would expect. So that's that's fantastic, that you have that perspective with people and you can keep people accountable in a way that's reasonable.
Yeah.
And I think one of the biggest problems is people don't understand that if you're in this, people complain to me a lot of times, we don't really turn the music up real loud here. We're not a big, I'm not a big raw coach. Every once in a while, if somebody has to do something where they're pushing themselves a little bit, I'll get a little animated. You can't learn in a combat situation. Combat situations are reactions.
Yes.
Right? Like powerlifting meets is a reaction to training.
Yes.
And if you're always in that super hyper stimulated, and that's a big mistake I made in my powerlifting, was every workout was, Pantera, ephedra, and ammonia caps. You can drive yourself really hard, but then when you go to competition, you aren't as efficient as you should be. So a lot of people, especially people that are new that don't move well, if you put them in a situation where they feel threatened or they're in a heightened state of alert, they're not going to learn. And the brain is the key to learning new movement. It's the key to everything in the nervous system. And if you're constantly amped all the time, you're not going to learn, whether it's physical stuff or even stuff at your job. So being able to shut off that stress response and manage it appropriately is very, very important.
Yeah, you got to keep the brain happy.
Yeah.
Like you said.
Let's talk a little bit about that, about what you've gone through in the last few years with, meditation and some of the other things, dealing with some of the anger and resentment and some of the mental things that you've had to deal with to get yourself in a better place.
Okay. So you're just talking about the brain and the brain injury. One of the coolest things that I've done, and I did this last year, I did about 20 sessions of neurofeedback training. We call it Brain Core, where I get it done. And it's connected to my chiropractic office. And Jenny Sloan did my neurofeedback treatments. And I was a little skeptical. Basically what it does is creates a more, an environment of homeostasis so that your brain is not fighting itself.
Right.
And you're just taking the brakes off. The way that they described it in a really simplistic manner, because I'm not a neuroscientist, is that you've been taking a path in the jungle that's really squirrely,
Right.
but it's what you know.
Right.
What we're doing with neurofeedback is we're creating a more streamlined path or paths to get the same route accomplished, but it's just
More efficient.
way more efficient, right? And after 5 sessions, I was able to feel some differences. And they became more permanent changes called neuroplasticity. You have the ability to build those new neural pathways, and my memory improved. Now there's a lot of times when I'm sharper than my wife, who's already really sharp, and I can catch her on stuff now where I used to just get bulldozed in conversation.
No, your wife bulldozed
Oh
you?
my
No,
gosh.
never.
She's a strong girl, so
Yes, she is. God bless
but
her.
ability to communicate was better. My sleep.
Yeah.
My sleep got so much better. I was able to finally calm down.
If you can't relax, if you're constantly in a stress state, you ain't gonna sleep,
Oh,
and
dude.
you're not gonna have good hormone production and all that stuff.
Like, let me tell you, man, when people complain about sleep, fucking A, man, I can relate to that. Let me tell you, because I could fall asleep. I literally fell asleep on a foot patrol. I took a step and I was like, oh my God, I just fell asleep walking here. But I lay down in my Tempur-Pedic bed and, eyes are open and I'm waking up. I'm not even kidding, 40, 50 times a night, dude.
Yeah.
I can get to sleep, but staying asleep and just toss and turn. So the neurofeedback and the AVE goggles, I don't know if you even seen those?
Yes.
They're badass.
Yeah.
So using those in the evening and the morning to kind of reset my circadian rhythms, really, really nice. And then, then I'm still working a little bit on the meditation stuff.
And you always will be.
Yeah. It's I'm like, when are you ever going to get great at it? Well, dude, I suck at it still, but I continue to try. That makes me not a failure because
Right.
I'm not going to give up on it. So right now I'm using the Headspace app again and going through session 1 through 10, which is just a real simple 10-minute
Yeah.
vacation from the craziness that is our days now, when we're just we're going a mile a minute and everything is a play-by-play type of a lifestyle on social media, and we got all this technology to deal with. It's a nice opportunity to tune that out and be a little more mindful, be more grateful about just being here every day. And that's kind of my goal right now, just really enjoying life.
Yeah. So you do like well, before I get into that, and that's why, like, if you look, the Australian government put out an article on the float tank and how successful it's been in post-traumatic stress disorder.
Yeah.
Things, any kind of relaxation therapy for people that are just wired, it does amazing things for people, and people just, they laugh. They're like, oh, I'm relaxed. No, you're not. I mean, you're running around like a chicken with your head cut off, and they don't put enough effort into that truly shutting off, because we never really get that anymore. So you're at LAC, you do like semi-private, small group training.
Yeah.
You also, you're a kettlebell instructor. You do some online stuff as well.
Yes.
Okay. Tell us a little bit about that.
So the online stuff started, actually my sister was my first client because she lives in Nashville. And, at that point in time, she was doing a little bit of stuff in the gym. And I said, I've been wanting to try to train people online. How about you be my first client? I'll train you for free, but you've got to give me feedback on what you need and,
Right.
How we can kind of smooth out the process. So, the long and short of the online training thing is programming, but what I do differently is the video coaching.
Right.
So I like to use an app called Coach's Eye. So people will text me videos, hey, this is my work set today. My last set, here's some squats or some deadlifts to look at. And what I'm able to do is I'm able to watch it a couple times, and then I can figure out what they need to work on the most. And I do a recorded version of like a little play-by-play, so I can make notes on there. I can draw arrows. I can zoom in places, and there's an audio layover of the whole recording, so I can be like, this is what you need to work on in your squats. And other than real-time feedback, being in person with people, that's about the next best thing. What's nice is how affordable it is.
Sure.
And that you're not limited geographically who you can reach and get in touch with.
Absolutely.
So I got clients all over the U.S. right now that train with me online.
Awesome. And especially the cool thing about what you've been through is learning, one of the best ways to learn how to fix things is to be broken. So, and you've definitely have plenty of experience in that department. And then also telling people to slow down, and be patient, which, you definitely can do. Let's talk a little bit to close out of where you're at now and some of the goals that you have for yourself in the future. A couple weeks ago, I was contacted by an organization. Go ahead and fill in the name.
Yeah, it's called Heroes Movement, and their website is theheroesmovement.org.
Right. So the gentleman, I can't remember the name of the guy.
Mike
talking.
McKay.
Thank you. My memory's like a goldfish. I probably need some of that neurofeedback stuff. But he had put out a message on strengthcoach.com looking for coaches in Lexington, Kentucky, and there were several people that listed me. So he contacted me and was basically, they are a nonprofit, and they basically they pay for injured veterans to train.
Yeah.
And and as a coach, you have these opportunities that come to you, or you have clients that come to you. And one thing that I've always done is if whether it's Justin Ford at LAC, who coaches Olympic lifts, or a guy named Alan Kress at LAC who does bodybuilding coaching and stuff like that. If I get somebody that comes to me and says, hey, I want to be a competitive Olympic lifter, can I coach Olympic lifts? Yes. Can I coach them at a world-class level? No. Whereas Justin can, so I send them to Justin. Or somebody that wants to do a bodybuilding show, I send them to Alan, because that's their deal. When this gentleman contacted me, he had a client that he wanted to basically set somewhere up in Lexington to have some of his people work with a guy. And in my head, the first person that came in my mind was Chris, because I can't think of anybody better to work with these guys than Chris, because I can't relate to these guys at all. I have an understanding, but Chris can do a much better job. So like if you're a coach and you have the opportunity, if somebody comes to you and it's you think there's somebody that can do a better job, send that to that person, because it'll pay dividends in the future for your credibility. If you take somebody on who you're completely clueless about, and you end up doing a piss poor job, that's going to end up reflecting on you in the future. So let's talk a little bit about that opportunity you were presented, and what your goals are, and what you're trying to do with that.
Yeah. So this was a really cool opportunity that you like you said, you called me up, and I was like, I've been looking for something like this. I've been wanting to give back, and I've been wanting to work with more veterans, and adaptive athletes, because I'm able to relate to them on that level. So I talked to Mike McKay on the phone about this, and the goal is initially to get a group of 1 to 6 guys, and their training is sponsored through Heroes Movement, and we're just going to get together. We're going to train, and it's going to be a mixed bag of backgrounds, ages. They'll be in different places physically, but my goal is to work with these guys one-on-one and then introduce them to the group situation. And part of what I've experienced on a couple trips I made to Telluride, Colorado with Telluride Adaptive Sports Program is it's kind of like a version of recreational therapy, and that you're working for kind of a common goal. You're training, but you share things differently with people when you're in those settings, in those situations, than you would normally. It has a way of breaking down barriers and building a bond with other people. So I'm really looking forward to coaching these guys and being able to talk a little bit and maybe give them some information they haven't heard before, or kind of spin things in a different way. I'm really excited about that next step.
Awesome. And I think that's part of overcoming adversity, is finding a way that you can help other people through the pain you've experienced, instead of being pissed and angry at the world. Taking the adversity and the trauma that you've been through, because we all go through adversity in different ways, but finding a positive that you can learn from it and get stronger from it, and then you can turn around and help other people. People get into trouble. It'd be very easy for you to be pissed at the world. Drink your way into oblivion or pop pills. That would be a very understandable outcome. But the fact that you've taken your challenges that you've been presented and you've been able to help others and your desire to help others is very honorable. It's a great blessing, and it's something that people, hopefully somebody that's listening to the show is struggling. They can listen to this and be like, you know what, I can learn from this, and I can get better from this, and then I can turn around and help other people, instead of sitting at home and going, oh, why me? Woe is me. Why is this happening to me? Well, these opportunities are opportunities to become a better person, and coal turns into diamonds through pressure.
Yeah. And
you need to embrace these challenges in your life. Everyone that I know that is super successful has also been through a lot of shit.
Yeah.
So, you just need to change your mindset and take a positive outlook on these things, instead of constantly complaining or saying, why is this happening to me? And basically capitalize on that challenge and help others like you have. I've got to watch your evolution since I met you, and I'm very proud to call you a friend, and
thanks, brother.
Thank you for your service. And before I get all sappy, I'll allow you to please tell people how they can contact you and all that good stuff.
Sure. So I do most of my training out of Lexington Athletic Club here in Lexington, Kentucky. And if you want to get a hold of me, you can find me at chrisfreemanpt.com. Long web address. We need to work on that. Chris is spelled with a K, K-R-I-S. And if you want to do online training, I'm at chrisfreemanpt.trainerize.com. And Trainerize is the app, the portal system that we use to host the programs.
Cool. Well, Chris, I really appreciate you coming on today and talking
Appreciate you having
about
me.
some difficult stuff and being as honest and candid as you are. Good luck with the veteran stuff. I hope people listen to this and you're able to expand what you're trying to do even more. I hope people reach out to you I would encourage people to share this show, because there's somebody out there that's going through something terrible that hopefully this will be able to help them out. And thank you for listening to the Jim Laird Show, brought to you by Body.io FM, or not FM, just Body.io.